Good evening, good morning. Welcome to PSSL 6251, Interagency Cooperation, George Washington University, and this is week 5, so welcome. I want to apologize for this being a little bit late. I am recovering, and I'm still in my pajamas now, but I'm recovering from a pretty nasty bout of the flu or stomach virus that has pretty much taken over my whole family. So last weekend I probably couldn't drag myself in front of this screen without you seeing me a little bit green. So I apologize for that. Just want to cover some announcements. The week 7 Adobe Connect session, again, it's be on that Thursday of week 7 voluntarily basis. I've already gotten some questions, so please keep your questions coming for that, and that's regards to the future of this program, regards to federal jobs, contractor jobs, jobs in DC, working in DC, etc. I know I've mentioned this before, but I'll put out the notes for the final simulation, or at least the rosters, tomorrow, so you'll have that. And then I also want to just briefly touch on some current events. It was a pretty horrific week this past week with the downing of the Malaysian flight, or the Malaysian flight over the Ukraine. And it has very relevance to this program as well as to this class. And I just want to again touch briefly on it. As I think everyone here knows, the Malaysian flight was downed by what appears to be Ukrainian or rebels in Ukraine with an SA-11 missile. Appears to be something done by a pretty sophisticated enemy. And just, we've talked about international organizations. Think about all the international organizations that have to be involved in this, whether it's the Malaysians, the Singapore, the U.S. specialists, and FBI, and the National Transportation Safety Board, all converging on this site. Hard enough to do this without the rebels in the area preventing access. So just think of the response when you have a disaster like this, and the rehearsals and the thought process, and who's the expert and who's the go-to guy to fill out all these tasks. Later we're going to talk about interoperability in Hurricane Katrina. Hurricane Katrina might be inexcusable because it was a federal and statewide issue. Here, this is an international issue, and so what tasks come out? Who takes care of the bodies? Who takes care of the investigation? So all those things that need to be done without even thinking about the international and the doing this in a war zone. So just kind of a takeaway from this week. And then the final thing that's applicable, we're going to talk about private security forces in a minute. I thought about this today. What's the difference between Blackwater, our privately funded security force, and Putin's privately funded security force that's fighting in Ukraine and committed this act on Wednesday? Is there a difference? I know I'm sounding a little bit, political, left-wing political here, and I don't mean to, but that's something to just get your thought process engaged. And we'll talk about it in a second, but Ukraine funds these, or Russia funds these militias in Ukraine, so they're off the book. So there's a certain amount of denial for Putin in case something like this happens. Do we do something like that when we're funding Blackwater or other private security forces? Food for thought. So last week, I think I just want to touch on one thing. Most people agreed that the Meridian Initiative is not cost effective, and it was brought out in both discussion boards that there's corruption, there's too many issues on the border between the U.S. and Mexico to establish kind of a fluid relationship. That documentary, I think, was in 2010, 2009, 2010. The situation has actually changed in Mexico in the last 4 years for the better. There might be issues of drug cartels and narco trafficking in Honduras and Guatemala. However, in that area of Mexico, the government, and this will eventually be a case study in counterinsurgency in the last 4 years, the government of Mexico has done a good job taking that land away from the drug cartels. So there might even be a more opportunity increase some sort of NAFTA poll or some Meridian initiative than there might have been just 3 or 4 years ago. So just again, food for thought as we move ahead. So this week, this is my favorite topic because it's something I've experienced firsthand. Should we have private mercenary warriors? As a young captain in the Army in Iraq, I got embarrassed. I was a team lead for an advisory team, and I got talked down to by a Blackwater person operating in my area of operations. Talked down to in front of my team. Talked down to because I told him he was being too much of a hothead, and I used those words directly, and he said, "Go blank yourself." So I want to be fully upfront with you and say that I tend to look at this situation through that lens. So I have a little bit of bias here. So with that being said, let me just talk through the advantages of some of these private security forces. The advantages are kind of clear, and there's a market for it, so there is an advantage. But the advantages are, one, it's cheaper. It is cheaper. Even if a Blackwater person is getting paid $150,000 a year, when you throw in what it takes to equip, train, provide pensions, healthcare, etc. for a U.S. soldier, Blackwater guy is probably cheaper. Now that doesn't include the sunk costs that the government probably picked up on when he went to Navy SEAL training or Army Ranger training, but the sunk cost is there. So just the sunk cost might be part of the government. The government might have paid for it. So, but keep in mind, if you don't include that, it is cheaper to bring in a Blackwater person. Quick augmentation. That's advantage number 2. Quick augmentation. If you need 1,000 people to guard your new embassy in Baghdad, you can get Blackwater to do it and get a force there pretty rapidly. Other forces. Blackwater is known for supporting U.S. forces in hostile areas. There are other private military firms that actually operate like an a la carte menu. And this was used in Sierra Leone against the rebels there. The Sierra Leone government actually went to a company and they ordered like a la carte. They ordered a tank brigade supported by close air support, followed by light infantry, and they were able to get on the ground a lot faster than the United Nations, or even the U.S. wasn't called, but even if the U.S. was called, a lot faster than those forces could have arrived in theater. So quick augmentation. And finally, particularly when you're talking about U.S. support or these forces that are supporting the U.S., the military doesn't do a very good job of supporting other agencies when they need to operate in these areas. So for Iraq, for example, we had a large State Department presence. In Afghanistan, there's a large USAID presence, U.S. Agency for International Development. Military tended to be a little offhand. They didn't want to give up forces from their brigades to support these each's and owns agencies. In that case, the Blackwater and other agencies were able to step up and fill the gap. So there is advantages to these private military firms. But I believe, and I don't want to rehash it, but I believe the disadvantages kind of outweigh the advantages. And the biggest one, and you'll see it in the film, is the Blackwater, the private military corporation. Their number one goal is their client, the person that pays their bill. They don't care about the greater strategy in their sector. They don't care about the greater coin counterinsurgency effort that may occur or whether they're violating it. They care about getting from point A to point B, or their client from point A to point B, regardless of circumstance. That is the biggest disadvantage. Second disadvantage is from a national perspective, these guys tend to be off the books. So when we say we're surging 30,000 troops into Afghanistan, we're really surging 60,000 troops, but 30,000 of them are contractors. And And the reason being they're off the books is because they're not accountable to the American people. If you say we're going to search 30,000 people, you have to testify before Congress. It'll be brought up in the media. The American people will know it. If you say 30,000 contractors or X number of contractors, because no one even really knows the number, American people are going to be unaware of that. And that for me is not good. That is lacks transparency, and it's not good for our democratic system. And then, third disadvantage, I don't like to use the word Yahoo, but I know some of these guys have that reputation. But bottom line is their incentives are different. So they're not subject under UCMJ or their command authority. So if you don't have the military discipline, then people act like yahoos. That's kind of human nature. And then the final disadvantage, and I think this is how it's played out, we're talking about impacting our strategy in Iraq. The film talks about Fallujah, and I should say the film was in 2005, 2006. It was shot. So it was it had the Fallujah incident in 2004, where those 4 contractors were strung up, for lack of a better term, which forced us to go into Fallujah en masse, which is something the ground commander did not want to do. There was Nisroch Square, not depicted in that film because the film was before it. And for those of you who don't know, that's in 2007, the massacre of several Iraqi civilians by Blackwater guards in Nisroch Square in Iraq. And then the impact that's had. I mean, we're current events. We're looking at Iraq falling apart because we didn't have a lasting troop presence in there. One of the reasons we don't have a lasting troop presence is because we couldn't come to a SOFA agreement between the government of Iraq and the United States. And that is largely due to the actions of these private military contractors in Baghdad and in Iraq as well. So there's cascading effects for having these people in Iraq. So just want to conclude, they're using Katrina. I'm not going to give you my opinion. You can probably guess what my opinion is on this. But let me you have the article there. That article was written shortly after Katrina happened. I think we all remember it. But let me kind of throw you something here, and I'd be interested what your thoughts are on the discussion board. If I were to tell you that there was very limited looting after Hurricane Katrina, 1, there was very limited looting. 2, there was no incidents of rape or assault or murder in the Superdome. Everyone remembers how bad the Superdome was supposedly, but if I were to tell you there was no incidents of murder, rape, or assault. And 3, there was no incidents of helicopters getting shot at or police getting shot at. If I were to tell you if all those things happen, would we still need private military contractors in New Orleans after Katrina? And that's just kind of food for thought, and I'll end it there. If there's any questions or issues, please let me know, and I look forward to your thoughts on the discussion board.